For the past several years during the summer months, you may have noticed people digging on Burial Hill in Plymouth. No, they weren't digging up bodies. They were searching for evidence of the original Pilgrim settlement. Because the area where the original settlement was established has been built up, finding the settlement has been a challenge, said archaeologist and Professor Dr. David Landon of UMass Boston's Fiske Center for Archeological Research, who has been involved since the start in 2013.
We kind of systematically worked our way down the edge of Burial Hill along School Street, and then got to the point where we were in fact finding some artifacts that were from the period we were searching for.
The archaeology students who were involved in the dig during the summer then get to take the items that have been found back to the lab to study them.
We have students who are working on master's theses on the parts of the project, so getting to really kind of go in depth and really research in a very detailed way some component of the work that we're doing. And it's also a lot of the students really like the archaeology in the public eye.
Both native and English buildings were built by putting posts in the ground. And when the buildings are gone, dark soil stains remain, showing the outlines of buildings and yards.
So we can recognize native structures by the association with native artifacts in conjunctions with post holes. And we've, in part of this area on Burial Hill, have found some very nice kind of early 17th century artifact deposits in association with some of these features that have helped us kind of identify this as part of the original settlement. In our digging so far, one of the things that's been really interesting is any place we're finding European pottery, we're also finding fragments of native pottery. Exchanging with native people and getting access to material that's very hard to get from England certainly would make sense, and is one of the kind of questions, the kind of material life questions that we can get at through the archaeology. Under certain circumstances, instead of just regular digging, we're just scraping the soil straight into bags to bring back to the lab. That gives us the opportunity to use kind of specialized methods to see if we can recover things from the soil that aren't readily visible while we're digging.
The soil will be analyzed for organic material, like seeds and charcoal, to learn more about the changes from the arrival of the colonists. One of the big discoveries from 2016 was part of a calf believed to be buried in a pit.
We thought maybe that there was some kind of unusual reason why this animal had been buried. Maybe the animal was sick or had died. It was obviously a calf. Maybe it had been killed by wolves, or maybe there was some reason it didn't get eaten because it appeared as if a big portion of the skeleton was buried without being kind of cut up and consumed in the way that we would normally expect. In the lab, when we brought that back, we actually kind of did a really detailed analysis for those bones. No signs of disease, no wolf chew marks, but instead lots of actual fine cut marks on a bunch of the bones. So it really seems like what we found was an animal that had been partially butchered and then kind of filleted, where they cleaned a lot of meat off part of the skeleton and then took a big chunk of the skeleton and buried it in a pit to throw it out and get rid of it. You know, this is an example of the way we kind of change our thinking sometimes when we bring stuff back to the lab and have the chance to kind of work through and think it through. Our ability to really look at all of these bones kind of changed the way we thought about what we had found.
As the artifacts are collected during the dig, the cataloging begins, according to archaeologist Dr. Krista Baranek of the Fiske Center at UMass Boston. The artifacts arrive in Boston and are extensively cataloged, cleaned, and analyzed.
So we actually do a lot in the lab, especially when you consider we have a crew of 20 out there for 5 weeks. That generates a year worth of lab work. So we bring everything back, and a lot of things first need to get cleaned, which is just a basic washing with like water and a soft toothbrush, but then some of our materials are too delicate and don't get cleaned. So anything that we might think has an interesting residue on it doesn't get cleaned. A lot of the bone wouldn't get cleaned, and some of the ceramics are so soft that they actually don't get cleaned either. At this point, we also separate out anything that needs to go to conservation. So we found some really delicate metal materials in particular. Taking them out of the ground sort of destabilizes them and speeds up their decay. We do things to sort of physically take care of the objects, and then we start to try and identify them after they're cleaned. So that means figuring out what kind of ceramic and where did it come from, and if possible, what shape the vessel that it was a part of was. Because ideally, we'd like to understand these not as like broken pieces, but what were the things that they were actually part of before they were broken? What do the nails and bits of daub or whatever we have tell you about what the buildings would have looked like? Things like the animal bones get separated out to be identified. Can we tell what species this came from? So we basically then try and identify things, and then we start trying to understand them in their groups. So all these things that we found together in this pit or in this unit, what's the date of all these objects? How did they get here? How did all these things end up in this place? We seem to have activities in one area that relate to outside activities as opposed to others that are things that might have taken place inside a house or be part of the structure of a house.
The dig is a team effort between University of Massachusetts Boston's Fiske Center, the town of Plymouth, Plymouth Plantation, Pilgrim Hall Museum, and local descendant organizations. The research isn't just about digging up the past. It's about using evidence to examine and revisit some history we thought was true.
The archaeology gives us an opportunity to kind of reconsider some of the historical narrative and some of the kind of mythology that's grown up around the story of the Plymouth Colony settlement and the Pilgrims. And when you're actually kind of in the side yard of a house and looking at the broken pottery and trying to figure out the nails and glass and what it all amounts to, it gives a very kind of different picture of the daily life, a little texture to it that's different than the usual way that we think of the story of the time.
UMass Boston's archaeology department plans to keep digging until Plymouth's 400th anniversary in 2020. Reporting for PCN, I'm Walter Cicchetti.